The winged horse is a very fun mythological entity to think about, because cultures from Africa to Europe to Asia, all independently of one another, looked at a horse and went, "This would be really cool if it had wings." And Fire Emblem looked at it and went, "It would be really cool if this was used for murder." The Pegasus Knight is the standard Fire Emblem flying class, being in the series since the very first entry, and making an appearance in every game in the franchise in some way or another. So today, I wanted to go through every game in the franchise and look at how one of their most iconic class lines have grown, developed, and changed over the series' 30-year history. But before we get into it, please remember to like and comment on the video and subscribe to the channel. Asking for that before the video even starts is really tacky, I know, so I'm not going to ask, I'm going to threaten you. Subscribe to my channel, or else... Honestly, I can't think of something. I feel like there's a threat I could make in a video about Peg Knights that would be very thematically appropriate, but my brain's just pulling a blank. I'm just gonna threaten to shoot you with a gun if you don't subscribe to the YouTube channel, so we can all move on with the video.
There is no meme. This is just a threat.
First of all, this is a video about the Pegasus Knight units, not the Pegasus Knights as characters. If I say a unit like Serene isn't very good, I'm not trying to say her character is bad, just her ability to actually contribute to your army. They're two separate things, let's not conflate them. Second of all, when I'm talking about Pegasus Knights in the context of games with reclassing, I'm going to talk about them as a general class and then go into specific units. I'm not going to talk about units that can reclass into them specifically, like, say, Kinshi Knight Ryoma, and I'm not going to talk about Pegasus Knights being reclassed into something else, like Archer Shida, because that's not what this video is about. It's about the Pegasus Knight units. And third, this is more so unique to Pegasus Knights than other classes, I'm only going to be talking about Dragon Riders if they are a promotion for Pegasus Knights. For example, in Arcanea, Pegasus Knights don't promote into Falcon Knights, they promote into Dragon Riders, so I'm going to be talking about Dragon Riders in that game. Or in Sacred Stones, I'm going to be talking about the Wyvern Knight class, because that is an intended promotion choice for Pegasus Knights. However, I will not be talking about Wyvern Riders in Fire Emblem 7, because they are a distinct class separate from Pegasus Knights. Dragon Riders and Pegasus Knights have kind of an intertwined history, and it's going to be something we're going to have to make a line in the sand for right now, or else it's going to get really, really muddy. So with all that out of the way, let's start with Fire Emblem 1 on the NES. In Fire Emblem 1, Pegasus Knights are categorized by their incredibly high skill and speed. They are fast, and they are accurate, able to wield both lances and swords and fly across the map. And their promotion Dragon Rider has incredibly high physical defense, being a flying tank that can soak up a lot of damage on the front lines. And they also have a monstrous 10 move on promotion, being able to get anywhere you want at pretty much any moment. But the class is not without flaw. The typical archer weakness of flyers starts here, with any Pegasus Knight being potentially one-shot by enemy snipers and archers, and the Pegasus Knight's resistance to magic doesn't quite exist yet. No units in this game have magical resistance, and Pegasus Knights are no different. That doesn't start being applied to them until Fire Emblem Gaiden. The biggest problem afflicting Pegasus Knights in this game is their promotion item, the Dragon Whip. It doesn't show up until chapter 19, only 6 chapters before your entire journey is over. So the massive strength, defense, and movement increase that their promotion gives them is just out of their hands until very late in the game, and that does hurt quite a few of them. And, though this doesn't make Pegasus Knights any worse to use, Cavaliers actually have more movement than them, access to the same weapon types, and while there are plenty of maps in Arcanea where a flyer can do things Cavaliers can't, There's also a lot of maps where that extra movement matters a lot more than flyer utility, so there are a few maps where, ironically enough, your Pegasus Knights are going to get left behind. None of this makes them a bad class to use. If you genuinely like the Pegasus Knight and Dragon Rider, you can use all 5 of the ones in the game, and you will not really be suffering that much for it. They're definitely a class with some problems, but none of the problems are exactly big enough to hold them back if you're dedicated. The first Pegasus Knight you get is Mrs. Fire Emblem herself, Sheeta, and she has a lot of skill and speed. Sheeta will cap her skill and speed very quickly, and on top of that, she has enough weapon level to use the Silver Lance that Gaiden has at base, so you can just hand that over to her, and she's definitely going to be able to one-round everything in the game for the first few chapters. And when that starts to break, she can also use the Silver Sword that you're supposed to give to Hardin. She does need to level up weapon level twice in order to use it, and I don't know, with her pathetic 80% growth rate in weapon level, I don't know if she's gonna make it. Now, Sheeta does have 2 major problems. The first one is her arms are made out of noodles. And I'm not even talking like a thicker noodle like lasagna. I'm talking this woman has angel hair noodle arms. Her strength base and growth are abysmal. She is absolutely relying on the power of silver weapons to do any meaningful damage. And while you can buy silver lances surprisingly early, eventually enemies are going to get strong enough that you need more than just silver weapons with her to kill things. You need her to get some strength level ups, and that's just not likely to happen. And on top of that, her bulk is very poor. Her base defense isn't terrible, but her HP and defense growth are horrible. She's not going to be able to go on the front lines and take very many hits. In fact, it really will only take 2 hits to kill her at pretty much every point in the game. Now this wouldn't be so bad in later entries, because there are plenty of ways for you to dodge consistently, but dodging in Fire Emblem 1 is not very easy. There's no RNG weighted to the player's benefit, there's no support bonuses, and while there are terrain bonuses, Pegasus Knights don't get them because they're flying over top of them. So Sheeta is a lot more likely to get hit than you would think, and it's really not going to take very many for her to go down for the count. So she does have a very real weakness that you have to keep in mind. But even with all of that, she's still very useful, as she can use silver weapons to do good damage for most of the game, and you can still give her 11 sword for her to do consistent damage later on. She's genuinely a unit worth using, but just understand that unless you want to invest a power ring into her, she's going to fall off by the time you get other flyers. Speaking of other flyers, Minerva is one of the funniest designed units in all of Fire Emblem 1. Because her base stats are almost all really good. Her defense is incredible. Her base strength of 9 isn't the greatest, but it is genuinely enough for her to keep on going, and her growth rates are also amazing. Her intended flaw is her pathetic base 6 speed. For the point in the game that you get her, she's not going to be doubling almost anything. That speed stat is genuinely atrocious. However, literally on her join map, you get a speed ring. And unlike later games where this just gives a paltry 2 speed, now it gives 6 speed in Fire Emblem 1. And keep in mind, all stats cap at 20. So she instantly gets 12 speed, and with her good speed growth, she won't have to worry about that for the rest of the game. They gave her one flaw, and then gave the player a way to instantly mitigate that flaw on the same exact map. And that is very funny to me, because once she has that speed ring, almost nothing is stopping her. She has fantastic speed, fantastic bulk, 10 movement, and flyer utility. There is nothing stopping this woman from putting the entire team on her back for the rest of the game from that point. She's pre-promoted, so she doesn't have to worry about the late promotion item. She's just allowed to go. And that is honestly very cool. I am very happy for Minerva and how much she kicks ass in the first game. If I had to pick a flaw other than her base speed that doesn't matter, she might have too much defense, which means enemies won't attack her, so they'll kind of just either box her in or just move around her, and then it's kind of annoying. But that is really me grasping at straws. Minerva is one of the S-tier units in Fire Emblem 1 for good reason. Paula and Catria show up at the exact same time, so for the sake of ease, I'm just covering both of them together. They both show up towards the end of the game, but there's still enough left for them to contribute in a pretty meaningful way. They have the really good speed and skill that the class is known for, but unlike Sheeta, have a functioning strength stat, so they can genuinely help contribute a lot more than her in the final maps. That being said, Paula is much better. She's only 2 levels away from promotion, and you get the Dragon Whip shortly after you get them, so Paula can basically just become a second Minerva that you get 10 chapters after Minerva. A little late, but still really good. Whereas Catria requires 7 level ups to promote, but once she gets there, she's going to be incredibly powerful. In fact, she's likely to be even more powerful than Minerva and Paula, but you've had Minerva for much longer, and Paula requires a lot less work to get there. Again, though, all of them are good. If you want to use Catria and Paula, nothing's stopping you. They're going to do very well for you. 2 really solid units that are worth using. The final Pegasus Knight in the game is Est. And if you've ever heard of someone describe the Est archetype of unit, it all comes from here. She shows up level 5, very close to the end of the game, but with some of the best growth rates in the game, allowing her to reach the peak of her power very quickly. Now that being said, it's not exactly efficient to do this, as by this point you've had 3 other Pegasus Knights who are, honest to God, gonna end up about the same as Est anyway, but here's the thing. It is fun to watch every stat go up when you level up. Est is not made for people who want to play for the thrill of efficiency. Est is made for people who brain gives serotonin when big number go ooh. That is who she is for, and there are a lot more Fire Emblem fans who like that than like efficiency. Est is a genuinely fun unit to use, and I strongly recommend using her if you're ever playing Fire Emblem 1. She does become an absolute monster, and it's very funny to see this little girl do so much damage. And on top of that, she completes a trifecta with her other 2 sisters, Paula and Catria. They have a special technique called the triangle attack, where if you have 2 of the sisters end their turn next to an enemy, and have the 3rd sister attack that enemy, she will always land a critical hit. Now, in practice, that's kind of obnoxious to do. You're much more so going to want Paula, Catria, or Est to go attack something else and kill it, than wait near another enemy. It's mostly just there for cool flavor. But honestly, it's pretty cool flavor, so I'm alright with it. Before we move on to Fire Emblem Gaiden, I do have to bitch about something for a moment that's completely inconsequential. You might have gathered that every single unit I just discussed was a woman. That's because in the lore of Arcanea, Pegsai will only be ridden by women. They don't like men, and women are thus the only ones that can ride them. This always confused me as a kid, because in Greek mythology, the Pegasus was ridden by Perseus, or Bellerophon, and those are 2 very distinctly male characters. Now, this is because the Pegsai in Fire Emblem are also loosely based on the unicorn, who does only appear to virgin women because he's a slut-shaming bastard. Now, obviously, mythology's thing is that you can use it and mold it however you see fit. Fire Emblem combining the unicorn and the Pegasus does not matter. It's just fantasy, alright? You can do whatever you want with it. No! How am I, an American, going to enjoy this Japanese video game based on Roman warfare when it gets its Greek mythology wrong? I simply cannot stand for it! Moving on to Fire Emblem Gaiden, this is where some of the features of the Pegasus Knight class that are prevalent for the rest of the series start to take hold. They no longer promote into Wyvern Riders, now promoted into the Falcon Knight class, and this is the game where they get their trademark high resistance, getting one of the highest magical defenses in the game outside of Dread Fighters. And in Gaiden specifically, Falcon Knights have a damage buff against monsters, which make up quite a lot of late game enemies. So honestly, the class is pretty goddamn good in Gaiden, just like it was in Fire Emblem 1. And since promotion happens at a set level in a shrine instead of a usable item, they don't have to worry about promotion as much as they do in the first game. So the class can really just have smooth sailing for the entire game. As for the units themselves, Paula and Catria show up at the exact same time yet again, so I think it's worth it to talk about them at the same time yet again. They're both Celica's early flyers, and they immediately join just before a bunch of desert maps, allowing their high mobility to be really useful. However, the better sister has been flip-flopped, as Catria is now much better than Paula. Since their stats will get set to the same point at Falcon Knight regardless, Catria's higher growths, especially in speed, mean that she's going to overtake her sister as your best flying combat unit. And when you combine that with how many swamp maps there are in Celica's later parts, your Pegasus Knights are just going to fly through and handle a lot of things on their own. And while Catria is better than Paula, she's not so much better that Paula is useless. You can't bench units in Gaiden anyway, so you're just going to have Paula and Catria both handling a lot of your threats. They're both very, very good units. Est comes back and is actually a bit better than she was in Fire Emblem 1. She doesn't show up quite as late in Gaiden as compared to FE1, so she has more time to fight, grow, and contribute, and since you can't bench anyone, she doesn't have to worry about being outclassed by flyers you've had for longer. You will just deploy her because you have to. Her stats are still fine, her growths are still great, and it is worth noting that the triangle attack is a little bit better here than it was in Fire Emblem 1. It can trigger on the enemy phase now, which is only possible in Gaiden, and thanks to enemy AI being kinda dumb and predictable, it's not too hard to trick an enemy to walk right into a triangle attack. The triangle attack also does 15 more damage on top of being an automatic critical, and there are enemies in Fire Emblem Gaiden like Cantors, where a free critical hit is actually kind of worth trying to kill them, mainly because they'll keep dodging your attacks, so you might as well make it so that the one attack you do land is guaranteed to kill them. Celica's route in Gaiden is very kind to Pegasus Knights. There's a lot of maps where you really want their utility. The 3 Pegasus Knights you get have completely fine stats, in some cases even great stats, and can contribute really well. It really is just a great place to be a Pegasus Knight. Alm's route, on the other hand, has Claire, and she is... Well, okay, it's hard for a starting Pegasus Knight to be bad, but Claire is the closest in the series to being bad. There's just not a lot on Alm's route for a Pegasus Knight to shine in comparison to the other routes, and her stats just aren't enough to contribute a lot of the way. The lances you could give her to help her contribute are just much better given to Clive, Matilda, or one of your armor units. She's not the worst unit on Alm's route. Forsyth is just a poor bastard, but she really does struggle to keep up. Though, much like with every Gaiden unit, you have to deploy her anyway, so you can find something for her to do on every map. It's just not going to be the greatest contribution in comparison to your other units. And honestly, even with Claire being kind of the White Wings are so good that I'm still gonna say that Falcon Knights have a strong showing in Fire Emblem Gaiden. I don't know why they have some of the buffs that they do. The triangle attack doing 15 more damage is kinda strange, and I don't know what about a Falcon Knight is strong against a skeleton, but hey, It helps, and they can really appreciate that. Fire Emblem Mystery of the Emblem puts Pegasus Knights back on the promotion path of Dragon Riders, and have a few other quirks with them. First of all, Pegasus Knights now have a base 6 magical resistance, which, given the competition around them, is actually among the best in the game, though they lose 6 magical defense when they promote. Isn't really that big a deal though, as the massive 3 strength and 4 defense that they get when they promote more than makes up for it. On top of that, Pegasus Knights can no longer use swords while mounted. They can only use lances, which also isn't that big of a deal, though there are some cases where you wish you could use 11 sword on wings again. Though technically speaking, Pegasus Knights and Dragon Riders can use swords when they're dismounted, which is a new mechanic introduced in Fire Emblem 3. Fire Emblem Mystery of the Emblem looked at mounted units and their incredibly high movement and incredible combat prowess, and went, we gotta do something about these fuckers, and introduced the dismounting mechanic. Now, if any part of a map is indoors, any mounted unit has to get off of their mount. You are not allowed to bring in your Pegasus to the supermarket anymore. You and I both know damn well that's not actually a service animal. In addition to losing the movement that their mount gives them, Pegasus Knights also incur a stat penalty when indoors, losing 3 skill and speed, which often doesn't matter given that their speed and skill is so high, but they also lose 6 magical resistance, which can be a bit of a problem in some maps. And Dragon Riders have it worse, losing their 3 strength and 4 defense from their promotion when indoors, which that can be a pretty significant problem all the time. Dismounting doesn't exactly make them useless though. While they do incur a stat penalty when indoors, so does every other mounted unit, so they're hardly suffering from competition when their competition also gets nerfed. And there's a new weapon called the Lady Blade, a sword that can only be used by women, and it's essentially a stronger silver sword. It's kind of tailor-made for your Pegasus Knights to use while dismounting, as there are no female swordswomen in Fire Emblem 3, unless you really want to count Fina, but shut the hell up. So you're meant to give it to your Pegasus Knight to help them get a boost when indoors. And also Cecile and Medea, I guess. The dismounting and loss of ability to use swords while mounted is not enough to make Pegasus Knights and Wyvern Riders bad. It's enough to make your infantry units catch up to them a little bit. I think that they're good nerfs that do genuinely make them a little weaker without making them useless at what they want to do. Now, all of that would also matter a lot more if it wasn't for the fact that the Pegasus Knights you got in Fire Emblem 3 weren't absolutely cracked. I'll skip over Book 1, as they're largely the same as they were in Fire Emblem 1, but Jesus Christ, Pegasus Knights in Book 2. The first Pegasus Knight you get in Book 2 is Katria, and at first you would think that she's very similar to Sheeta in the first game. Shows up very fast, very accurate, poor strength, blue, she's basically the same unit. But no, Katria's stats are just better than Sheeta's. Her base level is higher, which due to how EXP works in Arcanea, doesn't actually matter in terms of her getting experience slower. It just means that she can get to promotion faster. And her growth rates are way better than Sheeta's, and in general, are some of the best in the game. She is incredibly powerful, and will essentially be an automatic deployment in every map. Her growth rates are so good that even with the indoor nerfs, you're still gonna want to put her there. She's genuinely cracked in Fire Emblem 3, and could even be in contention for best unit in the game if her sister didn't show up literally 1 chapter later. Paula's the best unit in the game. There's absolutely no question in my mind. Fire Emblem Mystery of the Emblem should really be called the mystery of who the fuck balanced Paula. She comes in on Chapter 3, okay? Chapter 3. You have fought 2 battles, and at the start of the 3rd one, Paula shows up. She is level 10, her base speed is 4 points away from the cap, she has enough weapon level to use every single lance and sword in the game, Her growth rates are exceptional, and unlike Fire Emblem 1, the Dragon Whip is very easily accessible early. In fact, if you know where a secret shop is, you can get her a Dragon Whip on Chapter 5. At Chapter 5, you are going to have a unit with 10 movement, nearly capped offenses, respectable bulk, going around wielding whatever weapon you want her to. Paula is absolutely insane, and the only reason she isn't talked about to the same level as other dominant units like Seth, Har, and Sigurd is because the American fandom, by large, does not care about FE3. And they should. This game is fucking awesome, and Paula is just ridiculous. It cannot be stated enough how game-breaking she is, single-handedly. Just outright one of the best units in the entire franchise. Oh, yeah, and I forgot to mention, by the way, I'm recording this bit right here after I've recorded the entire 2-hour script of this video, because believe it or not, Paula's even more insane and I forgot some things. First of all, in her join map, by the nature of how it's designed, Paula is separated from the rest of your units and has to fight a bunch of enemies on her own. Which means it's not uncommon for Paula to gain around 3 or more levels on her join map because you have to feed her those kills. So her join level honestly is de facto 13+. And on top of that, the Iote Shield, the item that takes away flyer weakness, is on her join map. I didn't mention it in FE1 because it comes so late in the game it's almost not worth mentioning, but in FE3, you can just have her fly around while not being weak to the only thing she's supposed to be fucking weak to! Who designed this woman?
I fear no man, but that thing, it scares me.
I feel really bad for Sheeta, cause like, how the hell do you follow that up? The answer is, you kind of don't. Sheeta has all of the same strengths and weaknesses that she had in Fire Emblem 1, really high speed and skill, abysmal strength, but now a lot of her upsides are just not as good as they were before. She was your only flyer for the first about half of the game. No longer true. The Star Sphere shards can help her strength a little bit, but it's honestly not worth it when Paula and Katria are just so much better than her. She's not terrible if you want to use her, and thanks to the secret shop and just Dragon Whips being more common, you can easily promote her unlike the first game. It's just, the poor girl is horribly outclassed by the White Wings. Still though, she's going to be biding her time. She's not that great in Fire Emblem 3, but come Fire Emblem 11, Sheeta will have her time. Good news, Minerva fans, she's still really cracked in Fire Emblem 3, though perhaps not quite to the same level as Fire Emblem 1, because Paula and Katria can give her a run for her money, but she still comes in pretty early into the game, all things considered. With insane base stats, good growths, she's just going to be incredible. Coming in with a base 16 defense and 15 speed, giving her insane bulk and combat prowess, she's going to fly around everywhere and just take care of most things entirely by herself. But if you want to use the White Wings with her, good news! She gives Paula and Katria 10% hit, dodge, and critical when they're near her, because they really needed the help. The only other thing about Minerva is that she's actually required to get the true ending of the game, because you need her in the final battle to talk to Maria. This actually isn't really a problem because you're probably going to be using Minerva anyway, but still, it's something to keep in mind. And lastly, we have Est, who admittedly, this is one of her weaker showings. She shows up late with really good growth rates, as she always does, and again, while she might not be efficient to train up, most players don't care about that and like seeing stat number go up, but the problem is, in Fire Emblem 3, there are items called the Star Sphere shards, which influence a unit's growth rates. Because of this, every unit in the game can have really good growth rates. Est isn't unique in that regard, so she really loses the appeal that she normally has in that way. But That being said, those other units using the Star Sphere shards aren't on a Pegasus, so Est still can be really useful if she's trained up. Though it's also worth noting that a lot of the late game Fire Emblem 3 maps are indoors, so her flyer utility isn't quite as useful as it could be. Still, she is good, don't get that twisted. It's just the factors around her make her feel less good than she used to be. Honestly, with taking away one of their weapons and forcing dismounting, you would think that Pegasus Knights would be a lot weaker in Fire Emblem 3, but the Book 2 Pegasus Knights just have such cracked stats that the nerfs really don't do anything. I feel like Pegasus Knights could be way more balanced if Paula and Katria came with, not the stats that they have. Still, if you're a Pegasus Knight enthusiast, Fire Emblem 3 is a really good place for you. It's just probably not good for the sake of game balance to have them all this strong. Thankfully, next on the list we have Fire Emblem 4, a game that clearly cares about the delicacies of unit balance. Wouldn't you know it, Pegasus Knights are one of the strongest classes in Genealogy of the Holy War, for reasons that aren't surprising to people who know anything about the game. Being on a mount means high movement, which is really useful in Genealogy's massive maps. Their flyer utility lets them get around to save villages and reach other objectives a bit faster than even your cavalry can sometimes, and their access to lances is really good, as lancers are pretty strong in Fire Emblem 4. Falcon Knights in particular have some good things going for them. They have the skill Adept as a class skill, which has a very high activation rate in Genealogy of the Holy War, so they're going to be attacking very frequently, and it should allow them to make up for any strength deficiencies they might have. And they even get access to staves in this game, meaning that they can offer some healing utility on the front lines if you don't need them to kill something. Though it's worth noting that it is only healing utility. Falcon Knights often won't have enough staff rank to use things like Warp or Rescue, but a frontline healer is a frontline healer. Can't go wrong with that. And as for the units specifically, let's start with Fury. Mr. YouTuber, she's not called that anymore. I'll be deep in the cold ground before I recognize Irenaeus. Fury is the only Pegasus Knight that the Generation 1 army has access to. And on top of that, she's the only flyer in general they have access to. And because of that, she is incredibly useful. Being able to fly over terrain, up cliffs, and handling things is very helpful. She can go over and help Brigid, Claude, and Tail Chew if you need her to. She can go get villages in chapters 3 and 4 if you need her to. She is genuinely a very useful unit off of utility alone. Combat and stat-wise, she's a little unimpressive in the growth rate department. In fact, I think she has the lowest growth rates in all of the first generation, but her base stats and promotion gains are so good, that honestly does not matter. She can be a genuinely powerful combat unit. I would recommend giving her Finn's Brave Lance to make her really good. And you might be thinking, but wait, the Brave Lance is Finn's last memento of his dead lord and lady. Are you really gonna make him sell that to a pawnbroker just so Fury can do a little bit more damage?
Yeah.
With the Brave Lance in tow, Fury will be just fine for the entire first generation. A genuinely useful utility unit, and a genuinely capable offensive unit. The only problem Fury has, quote-unquote, is that she's a mother of 2 children who want different things out of their father. Her daughter Fee wants physical stats. Her son Ced wants magical stats. But they're actually both so powerful for different reasons, it often doesn't matter if you focus on one or the other. If you pair her off with a physical parent, Ced's base stats are so ridiculous it doesn't matter if his growth struggle a little bit. And if you pair her off with a magical father, Fee's join time and class are so useful, it doesn't really matter if her stats aren't that good. They're both genuinely fine no matter what you do. And speaking of, Fee is the lone Pegasus Knight of the second generation, and she is very solid. She joins on the first chapter of the second generation, giving her superior joint time relative to her mother, and that'll mean she can start contributing right away, doing all the same utility things that Fury could do, but just for longer. And depending on her father, she can also be a combat master. Since she's likely to get the Brave Lance and useful weapons from her mother, all she really wants from her father are growth rates and skills. Lex is an incredible option for obvious reasons. Anything that can get her critical or a cost is also very useful, but the funniest option to me is to pair Fury off with Alec. Alec grants Nile, which normally negates enemy combat skills. Useful, but not enough to justify giving Alec away to someone. But in Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War, Nile also negates the bow weakness of Pegasus Knights. So if you have Alec as Fee's dad, she can fly around without fear of ballista and archers, which is really useful. It's not quite useful enough to make Alec her best father, but it is really funny, so therefore it's something you should try. Really, Fee is just one of the better units in the second generation. She's not going to be an absolute boss killer with the holy weapon like her brother, or Ares, or Shannon, but she's going to be very useful for her mobility and genuinely solid combat prowess. She's very, very good, and I would recommend using her every time you play the second generation. Though, admittedly, you have to because you can't bench units in FE4, but still, it's the thought that counts. Fee's so good that her substitute Femina isn't actually that terrible. Sure, she's a substitute, so she's weaker, but she can still hold her own with all of the immaculate utility that the Pegasus Knight class provides. And though she does have Adept, she doesn't have Pursuit, so her combat is going to struggle a bit, though due to her high speed and the eventual ability to use brave weapons, she can eventually do decent in combat, though that's in relation to other substitutes. If you have any other proper Gen 2 unit, Femina's gonna fall behind, but in the context of substitutes, she's genuinely solid. Obviously weaker, but can still hold her own. And honestly, your Pegasus Knights are just really good in this game. Fury has no competition as a flyer, and though Altena will eventually join in Gen 2, she comes much later, and there's nothing wrong with having two flyers going around to handle things. This is a strong showing for the Falcon Knight class. Not quite to the peaks of Fire Emblem 3 before it, but still a genuinely good showing. The class has not disappointed yet, and a spoiler, it won't anytime soon. Fire Emblem Thracia 776 introduced one of, if not the, most important mechanics for the Pegasus Knight class's continued success, the rescue mechanic. With this, a Pegasus Knight can pick up any unit and then drop them somewhere else on the map with their superior flight and movement. This is what has made Pegasus Knights really good in a lot of games. On top of that, with Thracia's unique capture mechanic, Pegasus Knights are able to capture any non-mounted unit in the game because their constitution is treated as 20 for the sake of capturing and rescuing, giving them incredible utility both offensively and defensively. The only problem with them in this game is that Thracia has Fire Emblem 3's dismount mechanic, and that will be a problem for them in maps where they can't use their flying utility. They've also lost their staff ability since Fire Emblem 4, which is a damn shame because Fire Emblem 5 is probably the strongest staves have ever been in series history. But still, those are more so minor problems. The Pegasus Knight class is still very strong. Karen is the first Pegasus Knight you get in the game, and she can be very deceiving from her start. She starts as the worst unit in your army during the Munster arc. She lacks any killing potential due to her low stats outside of speed, and unlike Lithis and Laura, she doesn't really have any utility she can offer either. But due to the nature of the Munster maps, you kinda have to use everyone you've got, so Karen is naturally going to see some combat and experience, and she'll start to level up, her good growth rates will kick in, and once you get out of Munster and she can mount her Pegasus, she'll really shine as one of your best units. She's not an overpowered boss killer or anything, but much like Sheeta in Fire Emblem 1, and much like Fury before her, she's the only flyer you have for quite a long time. Because of this, for the first half of the game, her flying utility is invaluable. She's the only unit capable of doing certain things. Flying towards villages, taking care of long-range threats without worrying about terrain, rescuing and capturing. She is genuinely one of the most vital parts of your army for quite some time. And even when you get your second flyer in Dean, the fact that he absolutely mogs her statistically doesn't matter too much because you can just deploy both of them. And having those two flyers is invaluable. Karen does suffer in indoors maps due to not having a good sword rank. She might get up to D in the Munster arc, but Karen with steel swords is not going to cut it for some of the trickier indoors maps, but if you really want to make her work, you definitely can. She's a very strong unit, but at no point is she really broken, just genuinely useful and genuinely good for every playthrough. Misha is the game's other Pegasus Knight, and she comes in as a pre-promoted Falcon Knight on the A route. And the problem with Misha is that while her stats and weapon ranks are good, having A's in both swords and lances so she can fight well mounted and dismounted, a very good base magic stat to both function as magical resistance and the usability of magic swords, she just comes at a time where it's really bad for flyers. She comes in towards the last third of the game, where the maps are either indoors, where her flying utility can't be helpful, or are in maps where being a flyer is going to get you sniped by ballista. She just doesn't show up at a good time, and even if you wanted to use a flyer on a map, you've had Karen and Dean and even Ida for quite some time. Misha just doesn't have enough to stand out. Maybe if she kept the authority stars she had as an enemy, that could actually make her pretty good, but as it stands, she's just another body. You don't really have much of a reason to ever deploy her. But it is worth noting that her base stats are good, and her growth rates are actually among the best in the game. So if you really want to deploy Misha, you can give her a flame sword and she's going to do just fine. It's just, for how difficult her recruitment is, the payoff really isn't worth it. Or rather, it doesn't have time to be worth it. So for Pegasus Knights in Fire Emblem 5, we have one absolutely amazing top-of-the-line unit, and one unit who's not really even bad, just kind of outclassed. So honestly, a pretty good showing for the class overall. The lore for Pegasus Knights in the Alib games are that they all basically come from the country of Ilia, which is kind of Diet Thracia. Living there absolutely sucks, so everyone in it has to sell out their bodies as mercenaries in order to make ends meet, with men typically becoming Cavalier mercenaries, and women typically becoming Pegasus Knight mercenaries. As units, they're largely intact from Fire Emblem 5, maintaining their strong skill, speed, luck, and magical resistance at the cost of poor physical strength and physical defense. However, their benefits of being able to rescue and ferry around other units is still their best aspect. A lot of maps in Fire Emblem 6 can have a very strong strategy of just ferrying someone over a wall or over a mountain range and letting them handle all of the work. Allied Pegasus units also are part of a weird route split. Towards the end of Fire Emblem 6, you go on either the Sakaean route or the Ilian route, and which one you go on depends entirely on whether or not you leveled up your two nomads, Sue and Shin, or leveled up your two Pegasus Knights, Shauna and Tate, more. Most people agree that Sake fucking sucks and no one should ever want to be there, so you're gonna want to level up your Pegasus Knights to get what people mostly consider to be the better route. Personally, I do prefer Ilia, but I don't think Sake is as bad as people say it is. The other thing of note is that the Elysian Whip, the promotion item for all flying units, is actually one of the most easy to come by promotion items in the game. You can realistically field all 4 flying units that need an Elysian Whip to promote, and promote them without having to pick and choose one or the other. Compared to the Guiding Ring or Hero Crest, where they're in such high demand you really hate that Gonzalez is just not worth it over Rutger, your flying units manage to get by very nicely and very cordially. So good for them! The first Pegasus Knight you get is Shauna, and she really follows in the footsteps of Sheeta, having almost identical strengths and problems to her. Really good speed, skill, luck, and resistance, very bad physical strength and defense, but is your only flyer for about a third of the game, which means her utility is invaluable. And honestly, her utility is far stronger than Pegasus Knight's prior, because she is able to fly around all of the first third maps while being able to rescue and drop, unlike Sheeta, and with them being in a game that doesn't have dismounting, so she's just on her Pegasus Knight from the start, unlike Karen. Now, while her utility is undoubtedly incredibly valuable, her combat is high investment, high reward. She starts off with terrible strength, and that can't be mitigated by giving her silver weapons like Sheeta, so you have to have her attack things so she can get her lance rank up, use killer weapons, and then eventually silver weapons, and she's fine from there. Her promotion also helps her a lot. But getting there can be a little difficult and require some effort. But given that she shows up on Chapter 2, there is plenty of time for her to build up her strength. And her promotion item comes right before the Western Isles, which due to their heavy influx of axe enemies, would be pretty bad for a lance unit like Shauna normally, but you can promote her just before it happens and give her access to swords. You do have to put in some elbow grease to make Shauna work, but the payoff is genuinely one of FE6's best units. So I'd say Shauna makes out pretty well, and I would consider her to be one of the better Pegasus Knights in the entire franchise. Way to go, girl! Her sister Tate, meanwhile, is a little bit worse. She comes in at the end of Western Isles, and though she does grow very well, in fact one could say her growths are better than Shauna, the problem is she's really underpowered when you get her. Not unsalvageably so, but she does struggle to kill many things around when she joins. You need to start feeding her kills, and if you do that she's great, but she also suffers from the fact that Murity, the Wyvern Rider of Fire Emblem 6, shows up very shortly after her. So if you want to invest in another flyer, most people are going to tell you to just use Murity. And though you can, like I said earlier, deploy all 3 of the flyers, most people are going to see that as a little much, and Tate is just the odd man out. But as luck would have it, there is an arena on both of her join maps, so if you really want to try to make her work, you can, and you will be rewarded for it. It's just, she suffers from stiff competition before and after she joins. And the final Pegasus Knight is the pre-promoted Falcon Knight Juno. Normally, flyer utility makes it impossible to be bad, but Juno breaks ground in being genuinely dogshit despite being a flyer. Her stats are just not good enough. She struggles to deal any meaningful damage, and struggles to take any hits. And on top of that, the last few maps of the game don't really have the most for flyers to do, or at least, nothing for flyers that can't fend for themselves. Juno just has competition from all 4 of the flyers that came before her, and the only way you would ever use her is if you've lost your flyers due to doing an Iron Man. If you actually have all of them, Juno's just not going to see any field time, even with a potential triangle attack. The only thing I can really say about her is if you go down the Ilia route, which is where she's recruited, you do have to keep her alive to access a Gaiden chapter. So if you have her die on her join map, you've locked yourself out of the true ending. So in a way, she's technically required to beat the game. but that's about all she's got going for her. And even then, I don't think that's technically a plus. But it's something! For the most part, Pegasus Knights function in the exact same way in Fire Emblem 7 that they do in Fire Emblem 6, offering fantastic rescue support, and in terms of combat, offer really high speed at the cost of low strength. They are literally the exact same. The only thing that's changed is the world around them. And by that, I mean the Elysian Whip is no longer as easy to get. In a weird way, you want to be playing on hard mode if you intend to use your flyers. On normal mode, you do not get an Elysian Whip until chapter 20, and then your second on chapter 26 if you're doing Eliwood mode. Whereas on hard mode, you get one on chapter 18 and then chapter 20. So you have 2 Elysian Whips 6 chapters sooner than you would otherwise. Hector mode gives you one on chapter 25 as well, so if you're playing that mode, it's not as bad. But it's very funny that they've designated Elysian Whips by difficulty. I don't know why they do that, but honestly, the more you think about Fire Emblem 7 decisions and gameplay, the crazier this game gets. Not the worse this game gets, but the crazier this game gets. The first Pegasus Knight you get is Florina, and just like every other early game Pegasus Knight, she is incredibly fast, frail, and will be one of your best combat units if you train her up, and it's pretty easy to train her up given how early she shows up. But that comes with an asterisk in FE7. If you play Lyn mode before jumping into Hector or Eliwood mode, Florina is undoubtedly an S-tier unit. She comes in very early, levels up very well, and is the perfect recipient for the Lyn mode Energy Ring and Angelic Robe, which will pretty much instantly fix her bulk and strength problems for the rest of the game, and then you just point her in the direction of an enemy and they die. But if you skip Lyn mode, Florina becomes much worse, showing up underleveled in Eliwood and Hector's campaign, and not having the big benefit of the Angelic Robe and Energy Ring, and genuinely requires a lot more work to get going. She's still really good, but it is very important that if you want to use Florina, you're gonna want to go through Lyn mode. Those extra level ups help her a lot more than other units in that mode. They're not required for her by any means, but they're definitely gonna make her a hell of a lot easier. Fiora looks at Tate from Fire Emblem 6 and asks, what if we kept the good growth rates and slightly later join time, but actually gave her better bases? Because of this, Fiora is genuinely one of the better units you can use in Fire Emblem 7. In fact, if you skip Lyn mode, there's an argument to be made that she's better than Florina. Solid utility with a lot of maps in the game where having her and her sister fly around are going to be really helpful. Combat that's not going to be quite as good as other units, but still more than serviceable. Fiora isn't the most interesting unit to talk about, but she's just solid at what she does. A great A-tier unit that's going to do exactly what you want it to do and nothing else. So, yeah. I don't know how to really make her interesting. She's just a good mid-game flyer. Thankfully, her other sister has a lot to talk about. Farina is weird. Statistically, she's going to end up stronger than both of her sisters. Though she joins the latest of the 3 of them, there's literally an Elysian Whip in her join map, and she starts at level 12. So it's very easy to level her up, promote her, and let her do her thing. What makes her weird is that she's exclusively on Hector mode. Hector mode is a mode that, for those of you who don't know anything about FE7, only unlocks after you beat the game. Farina is the chainsaw from Silent Hill 2, just a new game plus weapon. And like a lot of new game plus weapons, she's genuinely really useful, but you can only use her if you've already beaten the game. So a lot of players probably don't see her, because after you see the credits roll, you're probably done. But for people that play Fire Emblem 7 over and over and play Hector mode as their dominant way to play the game, Farina is very useful, and getting her does unlock the triangle attack. But beyond the fact that she's only recruitable in Hector mode, she also comes with a very large investment cost, 20,000 gold, which in Fire Emblem 7, that's actually quite a lot of money. and she's not necessarily worth that much money. In fact, that's literally true in lore. She is not worth 20,000 gold, she just scams the shit out of Hector. Which, honestly, is so funny, I'm almost willing to deal with it. That's a great bit. Still, if you're in the mood to replay Fire Emblem 7 after beating Eliwood mode, and manage to save up the 20,000 gold, either by being frugal during the game or spending 500 turns in the pirate map arena, she's going to be a very solid unit. Just, she has a lot of quirks about her recruitment that are kind of funny. Fire Emblem 8 moves on from Alib, but doesn't really have any lore for Pegasus Knights. They kind of just come from Frelia, and that's about it. But they do have an interesting change mechanically, with Fire Emblem 8 introducing branching promotions. You have your normal Falcon Knight promotion for Pegasus Knights, but they can also become Wyvern Knights. Statistically, the balance is supposed to be that Falcon Knights have better bulk, getting 3 more HP on promotion and an extra point in both of their defenses, whereas Wyvern Knights get 4 more Constitution, which essentially translates to 4 more speed. Falcon Knights also get swords while Wyvern Knights are stuck as lance-locked classes, but swords aren't good in Fire Emblem Sacred Stones, so really they're functionally no different. Your Falcon Knight's almost always going to be using spears anyway. And the real kicker is that Wyvern Knights get a really cool skill called Pierce, which uses the Wyvern Knight's level as a percentage to have an attack that can just outright ignore enemy defense. It's like old school Luna ignoring all defense, unlike nerfed Luna nowadays which only ignores half. Ah, how the moon has fallen. Wyvern Knight is pretty much the better option to go to, though it is worth noting that if you want to use the triangle attack by deploying all 3 Pegasus Knights, you have to make only one of them a Wyvern Knight. If you promote both Vanessa and Tana into Wyvern Knights, the triangle attack doesn't work. And on top of that, you have to initiate the triangle attack with the Wyvern Knight. As a kid, this always baffled me, but as an adult, I've realized it's because the animation they use for the triangle attack is the same one from FE6 and 7 where there are 2 Pegasus Knights in the background, and they didn't feel like making any of them a Wyvern Knight, so just attack with the Wyvern Knight, dipshit. The first Pegasus Knight you get is Vanessa, and hold on, stop me if you've heard this one before. Vanessa is your only flyer for the first third of the game, has incredible utility because of that, and though her starting strength is very poor, her high skill and speed will allow her to get some kills, level up that strength stat, and eventually become one of the best units in your army. Crazy, I know, but Vanessa is genuinely really good. Her payoff is arguably better than Pegasus Knight's prior, because enemies in Sacred Stones are often pretty weak and frail outside of the occasional Cyclops. Vanessa doesn't need as much strength to be really good as some Pegasus Knights prior to her, so she's genuinely an S-tier unit in Sacred Stones, right up there with Franz and Seth as some of the best in the game. Her utility opens up a lot of strategies, her combat is very useful, Vanessa is just damn good. A genuine highlight of units you can use, and one that you should probably use every time you play the game. That being said, Princess Tana is no slouch herself, being a very capable unit in her own right. Coming in noticeably later than Vanessa, but not too late to make an impact, Tana has good bases, good growth rates, and though her base level's a little low, meaning she's gonna have to fight to get promoted, she can still catch up quite fine, and much like Vanessa, once she gets some level ups under her belt, she'll just be handling herself just fine. The only thing I'll note is that if you really want to use Tana, I'd recommend going Erica route. In Ephraim route, she essentially joins on Chapter 10 because it's not until the end of Chapter 9 that you save her, and she has no weapons, and all the enemies are probably dead by that point, so you have all of Chapter 9 on Erica route to level her up a bit. A minor thing, but just something to keep in mind. And lastly, Lady Serene is the final Pegasus Knight you get in Sacred Stones, and the final character you get in the game in general. Secret post-game characters notwithstanding. Serene's base stats are a little low, though her growth rates are high, she shows up with only a small handful of maps left in the game. That being said, if you want to slow down and grind for her, there are a lot of ways you can get her experience in those maps. The endless druids that spawn in front of Leon in Chapter 17, and the Gorgon eggs in Chapter 18, do make for genuinely good grinding for her, and she can catch up to your other flyers. Though given that there's only like 3 maps in the game left, that's not really worth it. Though technically speaking, if you intend to do the post-game, then there's plenty of time and maps for Serene to catch up. But, if I have to start using the optional post-game to defend a unit's quality, that's gonna tell you how good the unit is. Like everyone else in Sacred Stones, she's not unsalvageable, but you're really only going to use her because you like her, not because it's actually worth doing so. And that rounds out the GBA games. Honestly, even with Serene's faults, she's still usable, and outside of Juno, all the Pegasus Knights in the GBA games are pretty good. So yeah, it's a very solid era for the class. Just a bunch of good units and good utility. I honestly don't know how Tellius can possibly stand up to such Pegasus Knights in Fire Emblem 9 are absolutely cracked. Fire Emblem 9 is a game that greatly values mounts, arguably just as much as Fire Emblem 4, because they get that Fire Emblem 4 Canto, the ability to spend all of their move after doing anything. And on top of that, the map design in Path of Radiance really favors flyers, with a lot of maps where they can contribute in ways infantry units genuinely can't. Be it on the boat maps or the maps with large mountains, there's a lot a Pegasus Knight can do that no one else can. And lances are a pretty good weapon in Fire Emblem 9. Simply put, everything about the class is really good here. Even rescue dropping shenanigans are very helpful again. Just everything you would want a Pegasus Knight to do, Fire Emblem 9 wants it to do. The only addition that Pegasus Knights get from previous entries in this game are mastery skills. A Falcon Knight can use one of the 4 occult scrolls in the game to get the skill Stun, where for half of your skill as a percentage, the enemy will be, well, stunned, and then unable to move or act. This isn't god-awful, but you'd rather just kill them. So your occult scrolls are better spent on other units, because stun doesn't actually give any increase to your damage in this game, unlike, say, Luna ignoring defense, or Soul at least giving a survivability buff. But hey, they don't really need a mastery skill, so their mastery skill being mediocre doesn't matter. This is a fantastic time for the class, and on top of that, its representatives are really strong. Marcia is the first Pegasus Knight you get, and she reminds me a lot of Minerva in how she functions, in that she's introduced with something that's meant to be a very clear flaw that holds her back from being overpowered, but that flaw doesn't matter. For Minerva, it was her god-awful speed in the same map where you get a speed ring. With Marcia, it's mediocre base stats, but this is Fire Emblem 9 with bonus experience. If you pump Marcia up a few free levels, her incredible growth rates will start to kick in, and she will genuinely be one of the most powerful units you have. She's your only flyer for a little bit. You eventually get Jill, and then it's the 2 of them destroying maps for the rest of the game. Marcia's growth rates are great, her class is great, she's going to genuinely be the most useful unit in your army. In fact, some people consider Marcia to be the best unit in the entire game. I value Titania's early game contributions and call her the best unit, but honest to God, Marcia is top 2. She is genuinely incredibly useful and should be an auto-deploy in every Fire Emblem 9 playthrough. She's just that damn good. And as if it couldn't get any better for the class, Tanith is your second Pegasus Knight, and she's arguably even better than Marcia, and would be considered the best unit in the game if not for her join time being pretty late. Tanith's stats are good. They're good combat stats, she can kill things pretty well, her weapon ranks are good. honest to God, her stats aren't why Tanith is ridiculous. She has a personal skill. That's right, Tanith. Not any of the main characters. No, Tanith deserves the personal skill. And it's the ability Reinforce. She can use it twice per map, and it will summon Yellow Unit Falcon Knights. 2 per summon. Yellow units are a type of unit that are NPCs like green units, but you can vaguely kind of command them to go to a certain place or just do whatever they want. This skill is so ridiculous because while you can't control these Falcon Knights, they're actually very competent units. They can go out and hold their own against the enemies really well. You can use them as bait for enemy status or long-range weapons. You can just have them kill things. This is such a ridiculously powerful skill to have, and only Tanith can do it. She has good stats, an insane skill. Tanith is just a phenomenal unit, who again, would be considered the best unit in the game were it not for the fact that she only has a little less than half of the game to exist in. But by God does she take advantage of the screen time that she has. Though, and this is a personal point, I've had a vendetta against Tanith for 5 years, ever since one of her yellow units threw down a boulder that only hit my units when I was trying a deathless run of FE9.
Yep, okay, they are dealing with that Swordsmaster. What? 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 Why? What? 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 Why would... Yeah, excuse me? What? Oh. We have a traitor. There is an imposter among us, and it is that yellow person. It's yellow. I saw it with my own eyes.
The third and final Pegasus Knight you get in the game is Alencia, who has a unique Pegasus Knight class called Princess Crimea, which instead of using swords and lances like Falcon Knights, uses swords and staves. Alencia comes in very late and is only available for a small handful of maps at the end, and her combat is just bad. Her strength stat's really bad. She has a personal brave sword called the Amity, but it doesn't do enough damage because of its low strength combined with Alencia's. All she's really good for is being a flying staff user. But as luck would have it, being a flying staff user is really fucking good. Alencia is genuinely a great unit, but she is purely a support unit. She is there to fly around, heal whoever needs healing at any moment, and then flying away to safety. She's genuinely phenomenal, it's just you have to understand you're not killing shit or dick with her. She is there to heal. She is responsible for giving the Pegasus Knights a new triangle attack, but given that Alencia is only around for 3 maps, it's not really a triangle attack you can take advantage of. And honestly, Marcia and Tanith don't need the help. Pegasus Knights are phenomenal in Path of Radiance, and you should be using all 3 of them every chance you get. They are damn good, as they really always are. Their consistency is what's really amazing. While there might be a mediocre Pegasus Knight every now and again like Juno or Claire, there's never been a game where the class as a whole has been mediocre. They're consistently amazing and oh god, they're about to be mediocre, aren't they? The punchline to this joke is that they're about to be mediocre. Mechanically, in Radiant Dawn, Pegasus Knights are essentially the exact same. They have a new Tier 3 class called Seraph Knight, but that functionally doesn't change anything because you stop seeing Tier 1 units after like Chapter 7. So realistically, they are the exact same class, with the only difference being that Stun has gotten buffed. It no longer requires an Occult Scroll, now happening whenever you become a Seraph Knight, and it now triples damage, essentially giving them a second check for a critical hit whenever they attack. So if the class was one of the best in the game before, and has done nothing but technically get better, how can you say that they're mediocre now? Well, Pegasus Knights as a whole suffer from one teeny tiny but ever so crucial detail: Radiant Dawn availability. They are just not present for much of the game. There are no Pegasus Knights in all of Part 1. In Part 2, you have 2 Pegasus Knights that you can kind of use for half of the part, and then on Part 3, you do not get any Pegasus Knights outside of only 3 chapters total. There just isn't enough time for them in-game to contribute and level up and do anything. The class is still strong. If you bend over backwards to make the Pegasus Knights work, they'll be good units for the final part of the game and solid candidates for the end of the game, but all of them just require a little bit of work now, or if they don't require work, they're just not there for long enough to make an impact. Technically speaking, you never get a Pegasus Knight. You only get Falcon Knights and the unique Princess Crimea class. They're just not around, and that's a damn big problem. The first Pegasus Knight you get is Princess Alencia, now Queen Alencia, with the Crimean Queen class, and she is almost really good. The Amity and her strength stat have been buffed, allowing her to deal real damage now, and her staff utility is as good as ever. But she suffers from bad availability. When you get her in Part 2, she is a Tier 3 class, so she's really not getting any experience from killing anything. And when you get her back after Part 2, she's absent for all of Part 3, only being available in 2 maps in Part 4, where she's the leader of one of the 3 factions, and then it's the end of the game. While she is a force deploy in the end of the game, so she can still be useful, she goes from being ridiculously overpowered to underpowered, and you need to put in work for her good growth rates to make her powerful. And you can't use bonus XP like you could in Fire Emblem 9 due to the changes in how it works. You'd be handicapping her good growth rates. She is good if you stop to grind for her, but with how little in the game is left for her to do anything after you stop and grind, she's just not worth the investment. You're better off slapping a staff on her and letting her just be a healer again. Which isn't useless, it is useful, but it's just not enough for her to be really great when she's just not there. Marcia is in the exact same boat as Alencia, but maybe sort of kind of a little bit better. She's available for a few more maps than Alencia. 1 more map on Part 2, and she's available for 3 maps in Part 3, and then she has the same availability as Alencia for the rest of the game. And those 4 extra maps Marcia has over Alencia do give her a chance to level up, get some experience under her belt, and once again let her good growth rates in class start to take over. The problem is, that's a lot of investment, and there are plenty of flyers that do better. Har, Jill, Jannath, Ulki, all will contribute much more than Marcia does. But, to her credit, if you level her up, she will be very good. It's just a lot of investment. Again, she's not bad, she's just mediocre. But I don't want to be too negative. Let me think. What good can Marcia do that no one else can? She has a talk conversation to recruit Har. So if Marcia wasn't a unit, you couldn't get Har. Tanith returns once again, and she is just like the other Pegasus Knights. Genuinely fine stats, just not enough time to use them. Being available for only 2 maps in Part 3, 2 maps in Part 4, and then you have to decide if it's worth it to bring her to the endgame. Her stats are fine, she's close to promoting into Seraph Knight, and she has the Earth affinity, which is one of the best affinities to support with, so she can genuinely help whatever unit you decide to have her support. She's not terrible, but she's also lost Reinforce, she can no longer call in her extra Falcon Knights, and that was the best part about her in Path of Radiance. Now she has to rely on her stats, which aren't bad, but just aren't there long enough to be useful. It's a goddamn shame, but at least she's still good for the limited time that you have her. Sigrun is the new and final Pegasus Knight in Radiant Dawn. She shows up at the exact same time as Tanith. She has worse growth rates across the board than her, but starts very close to promotion, and honestly with her base stats and promotional gains, she should be fine. But again, she's just not there for so much of the game. If she was recruited earlier, she would probably be really good, just like Tanith. But unfortunately, there's just not enough time to use the 3 Pegasus Knights. At best, they'll be useful units in the desert map of Part 4, but other than routing that and maybe helping Micaiah get over to recruit Stefan easier, they just don't have a lot that can contribute for the limited time that you have them. The only thing worth mentioning is that the triangle attack can now be done with all 4 of them, freeing up some positioning and how you do it. It's something, but again, it's not enough to save the Pegasus Knight class in this game from being just so close to good. They aren't bad. I've said that a few times and I need to make that clear. All 4 of these ladies are good if you want to use them, but they've all got their availability holding them back. It's a damn shame, but we have the peak of the class in Fire Emblem 11 coming up right now. As Shadow Dragon is a remake of the first game, Pegasus Knights have gone back to promoting into Wyvern Riders, and Wyvern Riders now have borrowed the ability to use axes from Tellius, and axes are pretty useful in Shadow Dragon, as almost every late game enemy has a goddamn lance. So, okay, the class is once again flying around with 10 movement and incredible combat prowess. But you gotta remember, Shadow Dragon is the game that introduced reclassing. So even outside of the units that are naturally Pegasus Knights and Dragon Riders, almost any unit in the game wants to be a Dragon Rider at some point. Reclassing Jagen, for example, into one is a very powerful strategy for the early game. Making any young woman like Athena or Norn into a Pegasus Knight dramatically increases their usability on the battlefield. The class's flight and stats are just so good. The class really is at its strongest here, because with Shadow Dragon in general being a much harder game than the game it's remaking, you want really good stats and movement, and you can't get much better than a Pegasus Knight and a Dragon Rider. But if you really want to use a Falcon Knight, they've actually been added into this game as well, by using the online shop that you cannot use anymore. Yeah, we're just going to keep talking about Dragon Riders. I'm not going to go over the White Wings again. Not enough about them has changed to really make it that much different than it was in the first game. Though I will note that Paula and Katia are a little less useful, what with the higher enemy quality, but can still hold their own decently well, and Est is now a bit harder to use than she was before, since, again, enemies are stronger now, so her poor base stats are even more noticeable, but for the most part they're about the same as they were in FE1. Minerva and Sheeta are the ones that have changed a little bit in the DS games. Not really because their stats or growths are that much different, though Minerva does have better base speed than she did in Shadow Dragon, but because both of them come in with new weapons. Minerva has the Hautclair, an A-rank axe that is the best axe in the entire game. And since Minerva's base axe rank is A, which is the highest in Shadow Dragon, there's no S rank, she's actually like the only character in your army that can use it for quite some time. So she has a massive damage output early on, and that's very useful. So even if her stats start to fall off a little bit in the late game, what with the stronger enemies around, she's still more than capable of holding her own and being invaluable for the time that you have her. But Sheeta. Oh, Sheeta. Mrs. Fire Emblem, got a deluxe buff in Fire Emblem 11. No new stats or anything, but instead, she gets a new personal weapon, the Wing Spear. This weapon is insane, having very high base damage, and it's essentially a lance version of a rapier, being effective against cavalry and armor units. Which, what a weapon! A lance that's functionally a rapier. What a unique and incredible idea. With this, Sheeta is incredibly powerful against a lot of bosses and enemies in the game. In fact, on the highest of difficulties, that Wing Spear is about the only thing keeping the game possible. It can also be purchased in bulk relatively easily, and it can be forged to become even stronger if she needs it to be. Her poor strength means nothing now. She can genuinely take on the entire game with the Wing Spear, and because of that, Sheeta went from a very useful unit who falls off when you get better options, to the absolute best unit in the game, and for the love of God, deploy this woman or suffer the consequences. She is genuinely phenomenal in this game, and many Hard 5 players bow down to the ground she walks on. She is just incredible. Fire Emblem 12 has the Pegasus Knight and Wyvern Rider class continue with the exact same dominance that it had in Shadow Dragon. In fact, they're even better now in New Mystery because dismounting as a mechanic was completely removed, so they're free to use their incredible movement and stats in every map in the game. Everyone wants to be one, all of your units that naturally are one are some of the best in the game, not really too much has changed, so this is going to be a very short section. Paula is still fucking cracked, Katria is still really good, Est is still fine with investment, though on higher difficulties that's really hard to do, Minerva's still great with the Hot Claire, and while Sheeta isn't quite the insane best unit in the game that she was in Shadow Dragon, because while the Wing Spear is still really strong, enemy diversity is much better in New Mystery, so destroying Cavaliers and armor units is no longer destroying 80% of the enemy units, but still, all of them are really good, and this is a very good showing for the class. You only get one new unit though, and that is Michaelis, a pre-promoted Dragon Knight showing up at the very end of the game. And he is fine. He's a late game pre-promote. On lower difficulties, he's fine filler if you've lost your other flyers in an Iron Man. If you're not doing that, his stats are good enough. Not really much exciting to say about him, but he certainly is there. Yeah. While not quite to the same peak as the Argonea remakes, Fire Emblem Awakening is definitely a high point for the Pegasus Knight class line. Their stats, as always, favor speed, skill, and magical resistance at the cost of strength and physical bulk. That's all been done before, but Awakening's mechanics are really kind to the class. With Pair Up, their flying utility is more useful than ever, as any unit can just pair up with a Pegasus Knight, they can be flown anywhere, and then the Pegasus Knight can either just fight wherever they end up, or switch the lead unit and be a support unit for pair-up bonuses. And Pegasus Knights give very useful pair-up bonuses, with speed being a very valuable stat to give out, and the Pegasus Knight can give a good amount of it. As for actually using one in combat, they have two branching class lines. The Falcon Knight class, which focuses more on support, with giving them staff access and the ability Rally Speed, which, again, speed is a very important stat to increase, kind of a theme with Pegasus Knights in this game, and eventually Lance Fair, giving them +5 strength when they're using a lance, which, given how often they double, really means doing 10 more damage every combat. And if you want to go down their Dark Flyer promotion path, you get the very useful support skill Rally Movement, which sounds absolutely broken given how important movement is in Fire Emblem, but due to how pair up and rescue staffing works in this game, it's not as valuable as you might think. though still good, and of course the oft-coveted Gale Force, a powerful skill that grants an extra action once per turn if the unit kills something on the player phase. Which, I'll admit, I might be responsible at overhyping a little bit in this series before, but it is still a genuinely useful skill. It's just that, after researching more about the Awakening meta and how it's evolved in the 10 years since the game came out, Gale Force is no longer considered the absolute best strategy, and is instead just a good one. So keep that in mind. Still, this is a very solid game for the class line. Great skills, good utility, just a genuinely good showing all around. And that is no more relevant than in Sumiya, because without the powers of the Pegasus Knight class, Sumiya would be complete dog water. Her stats and ability to kill things are some of the worst in Generation 1 of Awakening. The only unit that she'll consistently be better at combat then is Donald. And with her horrible stat line, she's really going to struggle to actually fight and contribute. The best you can hope for her is promoting her early and then getting her to use rally speed. But, because she has all of the Pegasus Knight class perks, she's like a B tier unit, maybe high C. She's genuinely useful, but for nothing that she uniquely contributes. Her ability to give Frederick or Crom plus 3 or 4 speed is really useful. Her ability to ferry around Vake and let him get kills is very useful. She's genuinely really good. It's just that if you want a unit to actually contribute offensively, she's not really going to do that. If you want a staff user that can heal well or have large rescue chains, she's also not going to do that. Just understand you are using a Pegasus Knight and not really using Sumiya. But hey, that's really good. And then Cordelia comes along and asks the question, what if we gave Sumiya stats that can actually function in society? And you'd get a really goddamn good unit. Cordelia is one of the better units in the first generation, and will stick around for the entire game if you want to. Her base stats are pretty good. Her growth rates are pretty good. So with that, she can use the Pegasus Knight class line to the best of its potential. You want her to become a supporting unit, getting staves and rally speed on the Falcon Knight line? You can do that, though admittedly her magic is her one poor stat, so don't imagine her staffing being too good, but she'll really do good with Lancefare. You want her to be a player phase monster with her offensive prowess and the Gale Force skill on the Darkflyer class line? She can do that too. She's genuinely a fantastic unit. I strongly recommend deploying her whenever you get the chance. She is very, very solid. Captain Fila is fucking dead. Cynthia is the last Pegasus Knight you get in the game, and she's... She can make use of the class line skills very well, especially given that she joins at level 10, so you can instantly promote her and get her right to the coveted rally speed. And honestly, with that, she can contribute really well as a support unit. Though, because she's Sumiya's child, she doesn't have the greatest offensive potential. Still though, it is a bit better than her mother's, pending the father, and she can contribute with the same support utility that the rest of the class offers. So she is useful, just keep in mind it's gonna be dependent on how well you've trained Sumiya and whoever her husband is. But hey, the payoff can be really good. Cynthia is a good unit if you get the circumstances right. It's really just the sheer power of rally speed, I'm not gonna lie. So while Sumiya and Cynthia aren't the greatest, Cordelia's really good, and if you wanted to class change someone else into a Pegasus Knight, it's super worth it. Honestly, the class line is still really good in Awakening, even if the units native to it are hit or miss. Seeing as Fire Emblem Fates' gameplay is really just a more well-tuned machine of Fire Emblem Awakening's gameplay, there's not too much to talk about in terms of how the class changes. They still enjoy giving solid movement utility to other units, they still enjoy good pair-up bonuses when they give them out, and they're still a really good class. The only difference is that no longer can they promote into Dark Flyers. That's been relegated to a DLC-only class, and now they promote into Kinshi Knights and Falcon Knights, with Kinshi Knights getting access to bows and skills that rely on them fighting other flying units for a buff or healing nearby allies. These are pretty good skills for a pretty good class. And Pegasus Knights themselves no longer have a generic speed +2 as their base skill, but now instead get Darting Blow, increasing their speed by 5 when they initiate combat, and that is a very substantial boost. And Falcon Knights no longer have Lance Fair, instead getting Warding Blow, which gives them 20 magical resistance when they attack, solidifying the class's role as an anti-mage class even further. And if you want to use the DLC Dark Flyer class, like all the DLC classes, it's pretty solid. It works as a pseudo-promotion, allowing any unit to get to it at any point, which is a very powerful tool in the early game, and its skills and weapons are pretty useful. It's noticeably one of the only ways to get a magic-using flyer over on Birthright, as the Malignite class is a conquest class. It's a class that's best used in the hands of someone that's already pretty good at using magic. Orochi can be quite powerful in the class, for example. It's a genuinely good option if you happen to have the DLC already, and if you can't get it anymore, there are some avenues for you to still play the game with the DLC, but you didn't hear it from me. So solid stats, solid skills, they are once again quite solid. But what about the units you get in the class? Tsubaki manages to break ground and become the first male Pegasus Knight in the entire franchise. Unfortunately, he modeled himself after Sumiya, having absolutely garbage stats and being hard carried by the usefulness of his class line. Tsubaki isn't really that strong, he can be a little bulkier than other units around him, mostly because Birthright units are really squishy, and he is decently fast because he's a Pegasus Knight, but he really just gives you what a Pegasus Knight gives you. Flyer utility, good pair-up bonuses, he's really not worth investing in the long term. He does have the benefit of showing up very early on both Birthright and Revelations, meaning that he has plenty of time for work to be put into him if you really want to use him, but it requires reclassing him into something else and then getting him particular skills, and it's a lot of work that you could be doing elsewhere. Tsubaki also has the problem of being outclassed virtually immediately on both routes that he's available in, because Hinoka comes in very soon on Birthright, and Reina comes in very soon in Revelation, so he really just doesn't have enough time to really be that good. However, he does have a daughter that's one of the best child units in the game, so you want to at least use him long enough to get him married, which I could think of worse fates for the guy. Hinoka largely invalidates Tsubaki's existence by nature of her combat actually being existent. She can do good damage, has a very good personal skill buffing allies around her, and just does everything a Pegasus Knight wants to do with stats to match. She's the Cordelia to Tsubaki's Sumiya. She's very, very good in both Birthright and Revelation, though you do have to keep in mind she's not one of the game-breaking units like Ryoma. She's just good, and can do a lot of good, but she's not so broken that she'll solo like some other flyers and fates. She's still really good, and is a genuine include for a lot of the game. In fact, she can also use Dragon Veins, which is just another benefit to her. She's genuinely really good, though given that I basically said the whole spiel about her with Cordelia, I'm just gonna move on. It's been a while since I've been able to talk about a really good pre-promote, and by God is Reina a really good pre-promote. She's a Kinshi Knight that shows up early enough in Birthright to be really useful. She has an incredibly strong player phase, capable of doing a lot of damage and playing very well with her high movement and utility, and though her bulk is poor, that can be played around easily enough. Her strong player phase cannot be underestimated, though in Birthright it's not the most useful, as enemy phase strategies are typically much stronger in that game. But in Revelations, Reyna is absolutely cracked. She shows up earlier, her player phase combat is wanted a lot more, and Revelations just really likes having good bow units and good flyers, and Reyna comes in with both. In fact, I've seen some people call her the Camilla of Revelations, and while I don't quite think she's that strong, she is top 5 unit in the entire game, so she's definitely amazing in that game. And honestly, between 2 games, she's really fucking good and top 5. So honestly, way to go, Reyna. So good that being a Corrin sexual doesn't even slow her down. Though, by God, do I wish she wasn't. She literally has a backstory with Orochi about being a retainer to Corrin's mother. Why does she not support that woman? Kaldori is Tsubaki's daughter, and she is a Pegasus Knight that has actual stats, instantly making her better than her father. It's really not much I can say about her, given that I think I've made it clear how good a Pegasus Knight with stats is in Awakening and Fates. She does have an added benefit of being Tsubaki's daughter, in the sense that because he shows up very early in Birthright and Revelation, you can get Kaldori very early, which is something that's genuinely in her favor compared to some other child units. She ends up being a very solid flyer that you should really consider whenever you're playing Revelations and Birthright. Just a good unit, good stats, good availability. You don't need much more than that. Shigure, sure, he's there. Despite being the only Pegasus Knight you can get in Conquest, naturally at least, he isn't the greatest. It's mostly because he's redundant. You have much better Pegasus Knights in Birthright and Revelations, and though you don't have any others in Conquest, you have much better Wyvern Riders than him. He just doesn't really stand out in any route, and his mother being Azura means that she's likely going to pass down dancer skills to him that don't really benefit him as much as he would a mother with combat skills. His only thing going for him is that they kind of want to veer him into being a rally bot, with his personal skill healing allies when he uses a rally skill, and Falcon Knights naturally getting rally speed, so maybe if you get him rally strength or defense by marrying Azura off to someone that can pass that down to him, it'll be pretty good. But if you want to try to use him, you kind of have to shop him around other classes to get rallies, and even then the end result really isn't worth it. He's more so redundant than he is bad though. If you like him, you can definitely use him and he'll do fine, but with Hinoka, Reyna, Kaldori, Camilla, Baruka, there are just better flyers you can be using than him. Not terrible, but also not that great. In Fire Emblem Echoes, the Pegasus Knight class largely functions the same as it did in Gaiden. Still has the effective buff against monsters, still really useful for Celica's route, and it still has flyer utility and access to good lances. It isn't really that different, but considering how good it was before, it doesn't need to be that different. There are a few additions to it though. In the base game, you now have a villager that can consider becoming a Pegasus Knight, and as an option, it's not terrible. The problem is less Pegasus Knight isn't good, and more so that the one villager that can become one has a class that is just much better suited for her. So it tends to not be the option most people pick. If we want to talk about the DLC for the game, it does have a few additions for the class. First of all, like all the other classes, it has access to an overclass, and like every overclass that I've covered in this series so far, it is really cool, but completely unnecessary. But because it's cool, you should have it. The actual interesting addition is that the DLC adds an entirely new Pegasus Knight that you can recruit, Emma. The way that the DLC characters work in Echoes is that you have to get them in their pair. Emma has to be recruited alongside the Cavalier Randall by completing their extra DLC map. And then Mozu and Shade have to be recruited together, though you can recruit all 4 of them to one side if you so wish. Emma is a pre-promoted Falcon Knight, coming in with respectable base stats and respectable growth rates. She's genuinely very helpful at everything you would want a Falcon Knight to do. She's not some game-breaking unit. If you don't have the DLC, you shouldn't feel bad that you don't have Emma, but if you have the DLC, she's a good unit to use. I feel like she's really well balanced for a DLC character. Not too cracked, not too useless. The only problem Emma has is that she's attached to Randall. You have to get the 2 of them together, and that's a little awkward because they both want to go on different routes. Randall is a very powerful paladin who wants to flourish on Alm's route, where paladins and gold knights are really good. And Emma is a falcon knight who wants to fly over all the shitty terrain on Celica's route and be very good alongside the White Wings. You can't have them go on those different routes. They need to be together, so one of them is going to be a bit harder to use regardless of what route you pick. I think that going Alm's route for her is better because having Randall there is really good and Emma is still good on Alm's route, just not as good as she could be. Whereas conversely, the terrain on Celica's route makes Randall a lot harder to use, even if he's still good. But at the end of the day, you can do whatever the hell you want. You can tell Randall to go suck a lemon and take Emma to Celica's route where she'll shine. That's completely fine. It's free country. After Fire Emblem Fates worked so hard to ungender lock the class, Fire Emblem Three Houses came back and made it, once again, women only. Now this might not be a problem in and of itself, you know, maybe it's not that great, so men don't feel the loss of not having it. No, it's one of the best classes in the game, especially because Pegasus Knights give one of the best mastery skills for a unit that's in the class. It gives good old-fashioned darting blow, giving +6 speed when you attack. That is insanely useful, and is a big reason for the class to be as good as it is. Any woman in the game should really consider dabbling in Pegasus Knight just to pick up this fantastic skill. It'll be equipped as soon as you get it, and it will never leave your character for the rest of the game. But beyond just the really useful skill, the class is useful for all the reasons the class is always useful. Flying utility is really good. Damn good for a lot of maps in Three Houses specifically, and lances are a good weapon to use, blah 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 blah. It's all the same stuff I've been saying this entire video, and it isn't any less true in Fodlan. The triangle attack comes back, being learned by Pegasus Knights, and as long as you've got 3 of them you can use it, which is nice to see again, as outside of the remakes it's been absent since Tellius, but it's the stupid Echoes version where it's not even a guaranteed critical hit, so yeah. Cool that it's back, but it's not really back. There actually aren't that many Pegasus Knights for me to talk about in this game. In fact, if you comb over every unit and see what they become naturally, only 1 unit in the entire game is actually a Pegasus Knight. So I've only got 1 person to talk about, and it's our girl Ingrid. Due to Three Houses class system, you can really make Ingrid into anything, but this girl is definitely a Pegasus Knight in spirit, with her best growths being dexterity, speed, and resistance, and her physical strength being on the low side. A true Pegasus Knight at heart. She does also possess very good charm, which can help with using gambits, especially when her personal skill buffs her damage when she's using gambits. She's a very solid unit, though really in Three Houses very few units are truly awful, so if you send her down the Pegasus Knight class line, she will be really good, doing exactly what you want a Pegasus Knight to do. Even if she's not necessarily that interesting of a Pegasus Knight, you don't need to be an interesting unit to be good. Not everyone has some weirdo skill interaction that makes them some kind of monster. Some units are just good at the fundamentals. And by God is Ingrid good at the fundamentals. Though just pray that her strength doesn't screw you. It's certainly possible, but, just don't level up strength poorly. It's that easy.
But wait, there's more!
After Fire Emblem Fates made Intelligent Systems realize we would pay money to give Darkflyer another shot, they did it again, and added Darkflyer as a DLC class. There's no flying mage in 3 houses naturally, so Darkflyer allows you to take some powerful spells to the skies. And on top of that, I really like the class's skill Transmute. Transmute makes it so that if you're hit by a magical attack on the enemy phase, your unit gets +3 to all of their stats until the end of the next player phase. That's a skill that's not that hard to activate, and the payoff can be really, really good. Darkflyer is probably the best of the 4 DLC classes. It's genuinely strong, and makes a great case for any of your magic units to take. Its only downside is the concept of being a flyer is rough specifically for battalions. Since there are no magic flyers in the base game, there aren't any battalions that really increase magical damage for flyers. So the only one that comes up is the one that comes out in the DLC. So you really only want one dark flyer, otherwise you're not going to have a good battalion for it. Unless, of course, you're doing New Game Plus, in which case you can do whatever the hell you want. Warlock Raphael is probably good in New Game Plus. To represent this class, the DLC has given us Constance, who is a very fun unit to use. She is a magic nuke, tying Lysithea for the most magic in the game, and she has a fantastic spell list to go with it. In particular, she's the best user of the long-range spell Bolting in the entire game. In part because of her massive damage, and in part because of her personal crest, sometimes allowing her to not use a charge of Bolting when she casts it, which means you can use yet another Bolting. She has incredible magic damage, will destroy anything in her path, but struggles with everything else. This woman is made of paper, and she will die to almost any hit, and her dexterity can be very dicey, so whether or not she can even land those devastating blows, that's pretty suspect. But even with that, Constance is just fun. Going around nuking everything from orbit on top of a Pegasus is just a fun thing to do. Constance might not be the best unit, but she's really, really fun, and if you have the DLC, I recommend putting her in Darkflyer and letting her rip. She is definitely going to be a fun unit, just be ready to fire off the Divine Pulse pretty frequently. And lastly, we get to Fire Emblem Engage, where the way that Pegasus Knights are handled are kind of a hodgepodge of Awakening, Fates, Yggdrasil, and Arcanea. At base, Pegasus Knights are not tied down to any one weapon. You can be a sword flyer, a lance flyer, or an axe flyer, and you maintain the same benefit of great flying utility, high skill and speed, pretty good combat, though your strength is susceptible because the strength is low on that class. It's your normal Pegasus Rider stuff. Upon promotion, you can choose to become a Griffin Knight, which maintains the idea of them being a sort of support class like Falcon Knights in Yggdrasil and Awakening, with them only being able to use their one weapon, but getting staff access, and a class skill that helps the mobility of ally units. However, you could also choose to promote into a Wyvern Rider, like in Arcanea, where you now have access to 2 weapons, making it so that you can break enemies more easily, and getting growth rates that specialize in physical bulk and strength, at the cost of magical attack and speed. And while the meme in the Fire Emblem community is that Wyvern Riders are absolutely the most busted shit, it's actually a pretty good balancing act here. The higher speed of the Griffin class can be very well appreciated, while the higher strength of the Wyvern class can also work really well. Which promotion you want to go down genuinely depends on what unit you're having go down that path. It's an actually surprisingly well-balanced choice. However, as for Pegasus Knights that you naturally get, there's only 2. Though one of them is a unique class that's not the same as the other Pegasus class. We'll get to Hortensia, but first we have to get to Chloe. Chloe is the early game Pegasus Knight, that has everything an early game Pegasus Knight wants. Good base stats, good growth rates, a strength stack that can be a little susceptible to being screwed. Chloe is your traditional early game Pegasus, but she actually has a bit more going for her. First of all, everyone around her kind of sucks, so she is the best candidate to get a lot of the early game experience and kills. Because think about it, Clan, Fram, Vander, Etty, Alfred all blow chunks. They're not worth using at all past the early game. Louis is a genuinely good unit, but he does fall off as the game goes on, so your early game's experience is really just going to be going to Alear, Louis, and Chloe. And Chloe can do a lot with that early favoritism and start to snowball. And thanks to the Emblem mechanic, she has a lot of other ways to patch up her problems. Marth and Sigurd are the better options for her. Marth granting her good strength and speed alongside the eventual Mercurius, giving her even more EXP and even more snowballing potential, while Sigurd gives her more movement and more stats. It's genuinely a good option either way. And come late game, a lot of people think that slapping Erica and Ephraim on her are going to make her work, and it really does. For personal bias, that's what I did when I played Engage, and Erica made Chloe a god. She's right up there in the upper echelon of Fire Emblem Engage units, alongside the likes of Ivy, Kagetsu, Sadal, and Hortensia. She is really, really good. Speaking of Hortensia, she's also one of the best units in the game. Her main gameplay shtick is that she is a flying support unit. She has very good staff rank, her personal skill increases the range of some staves, and her class's promoted skill, which is unique to her, lets her sometimes just not have a staff usage get depleted when she uses one. And staves are pretty damn powerful in Engage, so even if Hortensia never actively attacks anything in the entire game, she's still one of the best units. Her support is immaculate, and many maps can be made so much easier just by the merit of having Hortensia shake a stick around. And if you want her to kill things, she's not god-awful at it, but she's not exactly going to be the best tome user. Even the utility of being a flying magic user isn't really enough to save her. That's definitely her sister's job. Go let Ivy burn everything from afar. Hortensia is pretty much just a support unit. You can give her the Micaiah emblem for even better support, and she's going to change maps by herself. Genuinely an amazing unit, and honestly, Engage is a really good showing for the Pegasus Knight class. Absolutely fantastic all around. I always knew that Pegasus Knights were a strong class, but going through every game individually, I realized just how strong of a class they really are. They've been genuinely some of Fire Emblem's best units in almost every game, and it almost makes me think that all the memes about Paladins and Wyvern Riders really should also be about Pegasus Knights as well. The class just consistently performs really well, and I hope that this 2-hour-long movie taught you a thing or two you might not have known about the class's history. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and after this, I'm thinking next episode's gonna be something that's like, there's only one of in every game. I don't know, dancers? Maybe we'll do dancers. Just, by God, this was a lot of work. I love making these videos, but I never remember just how much I have to roll the boulder up the hill like Sisyphus until I'm back at the base at the start of the next one. It's always worth it. The satisfaction is genuinely great, but man, I don't know how some YouTubers make these 2-hour videos for a living. Before this video ends, I would like to give a huge shout out to my patrons, whose continued assistance helps make this whole thing possible every day. Truly, thank you very much. My patrons include the likes of Adebayo Thompson, Alex Orliga, Amuse Not Beating the Tails Allegations, Andrew Crockett, Bean Juice, Benz Again, Hell on Heelys, Jay Hyun, Despacito 2, Lord Machi, Lysevening Bolt, Marth War Criminal, Morga Lorgan, Played Arrow, Played is pronounced like the pattern, Ranger Man Sam, Sean Vossi, Shen Lu, Viri the Artist, Young-Girl Owen, Brentendo11, Drew Hack, Fire Emblem Lord, Ginger, Goo Goo Gaga, Cornelia Milkers 92, Inverse, Lev Maverick, Maple Knight, Sombret, and Upscale Furry Trash. Thank you all for your continued support, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.